talking about due process of law and democracy.
He's entitled to the same rights as a white man. Process of law. And this is a gagging which is unconstitutional.
We're not going for it because we're going to defend Huey P. Newton whether everybody likes it or not.
Free from Seale! Free from Seale!
Cambodia, it's going on into Southeast Asia. There are 50,000 dead Americans. There are almost 1 million dead Vietnamese.
Will the gun charges hold up in court?
Nothing will hold up in court. These are phony charges.
This is a miscarriage of justice. We obviously are not going to stand by and allow this to happen. It's insulting, it's degrading, it's inhuman, and it's rotten.
To Charles Garry, the promise of justice in America's courts was too often, and for too many, a broken promise. For more than half a century as a defense attorney, Garry was driven by this belief in preparing all his cases. Issues of free speech, discrimination, and civil rights were often at the core of the criminal cases Garry took on. He forced these issues to the surface in courtrooms around the country, waging some of the fiercest political battles within the halls of justice.
He combines everything that you need for a scrappy trial lawyer. First of all, he is scrappy. Secondly, he is a showman. He knows how to utilize the courtroom as theater. Thirdly, he's a good lawman. He knows his law. He knows what he can get away with and what he can't. And fourthly, he has that courage.
Charles Garry has always been a tremendous radical. You know, he was a revolutionary. Whether he was actually a member of the Communist Party, as I was, I don't know. Perhaps he was not. But in any event, he was a complete... he was an anarchist and a rebel in all ways. And to me, that was fascinating. I loved him.
Lawyers, they believe in the majesty of the law, you know, and so that they're like, even if they don't, they might not know about their client's innocence, but they believe that a client has a right to as good a defense as possible, even though they don't believe in their client. They don't necessarily, and they believe in the law. Well, Charlie didn't believe in the majesty of the law in that way. He wasn't into that kind of. He defended people who deserved to be defended.
You stayed behind him.
The rest of the legal community looked upon him with awe and fascination because he was able to do things that a lot of them weren't. I mean, you've been in court, no doubt, and seen lawyers blithering on in the most boring fashion, you know, snore, snore. And that never happened when Charles Garry was addressing a jury.
Did you see him like this?
When Charles took a case, it wasn't simply to win or lose the case. It was to win the case and in the process making a political point.
In the 1940s and 50s, the fear of communism was on full and powerful display by Congress's House Un-American Activities Committee. HUAC called hearing after hearing questioning citizens about their alleged communist behavior. Many of those called to testify never recovered from being labeled communist. Charles Garry saw HUAC as an unjust and destructive force. He organized lawyers against the committee, and he too was called to testify.
Mr. Garry, were you a member of the Communist Party at any time while you held an office in the National Lawyers Guild?
I'm here under protest, Mr. Chairman.
I think I should ask you to answer the question.
I will answer the question, and I don't hesitate answering that question, but before I do, I want to protect my own record, sir. You brought me in here under protest, and I want the record to show that this authority that you are asking this question to me at the present time is without legal foundation.
I direct you to answer the question.
I direct you to my answers that I heretofore have given, and I restate them for each and every one of the single reasons. And I want to add one other reason, if I may, sir. I want to refer to the Holy Bible, if I may, in the book of Matthew.
The communists deny God and deny that book, do they not?
Mr. Chairman, you are now getting into the field of my religious beliefs. I'm very proud to tell you, sir, that I happen to be Christian. My people for thousands of years have been Christians. I happen to be a very happy church member, and I resent any insinuation from you, Mr. Shearer, or anybody else like you.
All I want to know, whether you do not know that the communists deny God and deny that book which you cited.
Mr. Chairman, what the communists do or do not do in relationship to their God is their own business. What I do for my God is my own, and not yours.
After hearing Garry testify, Huey abandoned his attack on communists in San Francisco and left the city. But the committee returned in 1960 and was met by vigorous protests. Garry was not a witness this time, but he was close at hand when hundreds of arrested students needed a lawyer, and when one of them was accused of assaulting a policeman.
The students at Berkeley organized this huge demonstration there. They found that they weren't able to get into the hearing, that the UAC staff was handing out white cards to people that they knew would support them. And so it was supposed to be a hearing, a congressional hearing open to the general public, but it really wasn't.
And these guys just raised hell. We demand to get in there. And at the rotunda in the city hall, they started hosing these people.
They singled out one guy named Bob Meisenbach. So he was brought up on a felony charge of assaulting a cop or something like that.
The facts were that instead of Meisenbach striking this police officer, it was just the other way around. He was wheeling the baton and he slipped on the watery, slippy stairs and he went bungling down the steps. But it was the history of the committee that was on trial. We pointed out what the committee's role was and why it was there. It was to curtail freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. We pointed out, where are they in this trial? Why aren't they here? Why aren't they here testifying?
It kind of became a case that symbolized UAC and the whole student movement. Meisenbach got acquitted, and that was like the final shove. UAC was never heard of after that, 1960. It was people, the next time UAC was heard of, people were just laughing in its face.
The Black Power movement assumed one of its most aggressive forms with the creation of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. With its fierce platform of black pride and social reform, the party rapidly gained a national reputation. But at the beginning in 1966, the Panthers were just a small group of tough, poor blacks, whose first political act was the monitoring of policemen on their patrols. It was an effort to stop the police brutality so familiar to blacks in Oakland. And that bold purpose was what inspired Charles Garry.
Charlie, once he decides that I'm going to take this case, he's pell-mell, full speed ahead. He doesn't back down. He doesn't try to palm deals off on people, and he really fights. I mean, in some ways, you know, Charlie was like a Black Panther. I mean, the Black Panther Party was internalized within him.
Many of these men and women have been sent to prison because they're minorities or people from low-income groups who haven't had the rights and the privileges of having counsel represent them at every stage of the proceedings.
For our people, death has been the only known exit from slavery and oppression. We must open others. Our will to live must no longer supersede our will to fight, for our fighting will determine whether or not our race shall live.
We must have sovereignty for our communities. We must have the right to determine how we want to live, how we want our children to be educated. Like the Black Panther Party is trying to do, maintain the dignity and integrity of the black community by any means necessary. And this is the confrontation. And if you ain't ready for it, it will run right over you.
Huey Newton and Bobby Seale would both carry guns. And if they saw the police stopping a black person, they would stand about 10 feet away with their guns at their side. And they would say, give your name and address. And if they say you're under arrest, submit without any resistance. We will follow you and we'll bail you out.
You have to imagine, we jump out of a car, we walk up, 5 or 6 of us, uniform, we got law books, tape recorders, what have you, and say there's a bunch of people in the black community standing around watching the police make an arrest. And the police turn around and look and see all these niggas with guns. I mean, you have to see the expression on these guys' faces, to see all this with guns. What are you doing with those guns? And Huey would say, what are you doing with your gun? I have my gun to defend myself, and we have our gun to defend ourselves and observe you. You have no right to observe me. And Huey, quick with the law. Every citizen has a right to observe a police officer carrying out their duty as long as they stand a reasonable distance away. A reasonable distance constituted in such and such Supreme Court ruling as 8 to 10 feet. I'm standing approximately 20 feet from you. I will observe you whether you like it or not. And the black community would say, well, go ahead on and tell it, you know, that kind of stuff.
And it became a cry of human dignity. Did you invade my house? I'm going to kill you. I'm not going to take it. We're not going to take it laying down.
We wanted to deal with the larger problem of crime, and we felt that was unemployment and lack of proper housing. We said that, well, if the police won't protect our community, if they'll only abuse our community, we should have guns and protect ourselves.
Personally, I hate guns. Not because I'm a panty-waist, but because I don't think guns accomplish what they claim to do. I believe in collective strength to be able to get the attainment of where you want to go. But Huey's position was until such time as the people have the power, they've got to also be in a position to ward off the enemy. Those are the kind of things that I respected in him, and I loved the man.
Oakland police officers continue to follow a divergent trail of sparse clues today in the brutal gun battle which saw 2 Oakland police officers shot and chief suspect Huey Newton, the militant leader of the Black Panther Party, shot in the stomach. The gun battle took place here on 7th Street, leaving 1 officer dead, 1 critically wounded, and Newton shot in the stomach, who is now reported in fair condition.
Huey was charged with first-degree murder, the death of Officer Fry, and attempted murder and the wounding of Officer Haynes, all right? Well, naturally, we had to get Huey a lawyer. Now, all the black nationalist groups says, you can't have a white lawyer. We say, well, we think we chose the best technician. I'm talking about somebody who is not going to sell us out. Just remember, we're on the left, we're on the far left political revolutionary wing of whatever the hell is going on in America.
He was in the Highland Hospital, and police were in his room and police outside the door, police all the way around. And as I walked in, I heard one of the police say, we're going to cut that trachea tube and choke you to death so we'll save us from gassing you, you black son of a bitch. I just heard that as I walked in.
Well, I was impressed with his honesty. I asked him, you know, could he, did he think he could free me? And he told me he had never lost one to the gas chamber, and he would tell me that he wouldn't lose me to the gas chamber. And while that wasn't freeing me, that was somewhat of a relief at that time.
The revolution has come. Off the beat. It's time to pick up the gun. No more brothers in jail. Off the beat. No more brothers in jail.
I mean, to go to the courtroom was nothing. For me and Huey, to go to the courtroom, we thought you said, let's make love. I mean, really. I mean, this is where we felt about going to the courtroom, you know. And, well, you couldn't intimidate us. I mean, if they're going to intimidate you with a court trial and some jail and stuff, you cannot organize nothing. So therefore, when you come to the courtroom, you bring in all our issues and everything into that courtroom.
It wasn't until I started developing Huey's defense, and I spent practically every day in jail with him, preparing his case. And what I learned was real history. I started rereading books that I had read many years before that, reading them from the standpoint of a black person. By the time I finished and got ready to try the case, I was as much steeped in black history as any black person would be.
Newton's attorney, Charles Garry, spent most of the day questioning a Cal sociology professor about the alleged disproportionate number of whites represented and registered to vote. Professor Jan Desard said that this tended to deprive blacks of their correct percentage on county juries.
It's going to take us a while to get a jury, and the very
First of all, I had to get over the propaganda of hysteria. I had to get over racism, and to be able to put Huey into a position of neutrality, so that the people who were going to try the case would not have a prejudgment.
Charles Garry has been progressive, I guess, all or most of his life, and he understood the oppression of the black community. Charles Garry did a thorough job in trying to get people to be honest about their racist views, to show some facts about the black community, and in that way that would educate some of, maybe lift the consciousness of some of the jurors about why they had arrived at stereotyped feelings about blacks.
I said an objective racist is one who says, I don't like niggers. A good nigger is a dead nigger. I don't want one in my establishment. I said, you're not one of those, are you? She said, oh no, Mr. Garry, I'm not. Then the next one is the subjective. Subjective racist. Now the subjective racist is the person who says, I'm for colored people, I'm for Negroes, I'm for black people, but said, I'm interested in what follows the but. Some say, I'm for them, but why can't they take more baths? Why can't they paint their house? Why can't they make a go of their own self? The Armenians do it, the Jews do it, the Irish do it.
He has the best set of questions to show whether a person is really racist or not. He doesn't ask such questions, how do you feel about black people, if he has Huey Newton or Bobby Seale on trial. He asks great questions like if you were on a camping trip with a black man and a white man, and you lost your toothbrush, and you went into the washroom, and you saw two toothbrushes there, one for the white man and one for the black man. Which one would you use? You know, if the person says, oh, I'd use the black man, you know, then you know he's a liar, and you get rid of him. If he says, I'd use the white man, you probably have a relatively honest person, and you can maybe work with that person, but at least you understand it.
And if you have a redneck on the jury, there's nothing you can do with a redneck. Because a redneck, by the very definition, is a jerk. And a jerk is a jerk, because a jerk is a jerk. You can't unjerk him.
The law was on the side of the oppressor much of the time. And that's where he would defend us, or try, and in other cases, try to use their laws, not in their interest, but against them, to defend us against the law, to defend us from the law.
First of all, I was educating the jury. 300 years of slavery, and why the Black Panther Party was formed. What was the meaning of the 10-point program, which was patterned after the Declaration of Independence? We want freedom, we want homes, we want to be able to control our own community. Why was that necessary? It goes beyond whether I was trying to manufacture a political case and take the sting out of the actual crime. That's not the case. I was trying the case in the proper setting, and the jury began to understand what it was all about. They came in with a verdict of manslaughter, and not guilty verdict on the attempt to kill the other police officer, and not guilty of the kidnapping.
I believe that the leader of the party, the Minister of Defense of the party, being out on the street today is going to mean a tremendous impetus to the liberation movement of America, both black, brown, yellow, red, and white.
Because I didn't go to the gas chamber or spend the rest of my life in prison, that might have freed the spirit of many other blacks and oppressed people to challenge the system and not be afraid that their challenge would just be crushed without any possibility of winning a fair hearing anyway.
Discrimination was something painfully familiar to Charles Garry. The son of poor immigrants, survivors of the Armenian Genocide, Charles inherited the legacy of torture and death marches his people had endured. The persecution didn't disappear when the Garabedians came to America. Armenians in the San Joaquin Valley faced open hostility. Many were denied jobs, property, even access to public services. At home and in the classroom, Charles would be constantly reminded of the pain of racial hatred.
What it felt like to grow up as an Armenian in Selma, California, is the problem that has always made a very indelible dent in my life. My father was a great human being. He came to this country in one of the massacres in 1897 from Turkey, and his Turkish neighbors had him dress up like a Turk so he could get out of the country. My father was sold a 10-acre ranch with young trees on it that wouldn't bear any fruit for 5 years. No house on there, we had no place to live. So he bought some lumber and put a box house together. You ought to have seen that house. It's horrible. Just a box house. Christmas Eve, we went to bed hungry, not a crust of bread in the house. My father was so despondent that there was a .38 revolver and he tried to kill himself. I see that as Christmas Eve.
Charlie worked in the canneries and ran into a lot of discrimination because he was an Armenian. Was constantly getting into fights with kids in his school over remarks that he considered ethnic slurs.
I don't know how you could be any lower than an Armenian. We were the niggers of the valley. And I was mimicked, picked upon, talked upon, and I hated every part of that atmosphere. I knew what it was to be an Armenian, and I knew what it was to be black as I became a lawyer. Fortunately, I was able to leave all that because I wasn't black. All I had to do was change my name. I've never denied my nationality. I'm proud of my nationality. I'm proud of the Armenian people to be able to withstand all those years.
We found a night school for law, and he took up law, and between pressing clothes, he studied law on that tailoring table in the back end. And he went to school at night at San Francisco Law School and graduated.
And because he was involved with unions, he soon had a practice where he was on retainer from 16 different unions. Being a union lawyer meant not only negotiating contracts, but handling all the personal legal problems of the members.
You can't fight a war from Market Street. That's what he said. You can't fight it from Market Street, so you get in and try to get it over with. He really wanted to go in the Marine Corps, but he said they said he had an overbite and he couldn't pull a grenade pin. So he went in as a buck private, and he refused any rank. Wouldn't take any rank whatsoever. He said, if I've got nothing, they can't take anything away from me, and I will remain with the same principles I had when I went in.
The 1968 Democratic National Convention is often remembered most for what happened outside the convention hall, on the streets of Chicago. Marches and demonstrations led to riots and violence. 8 political activists, including Bobby Seale, were blamed for the unrest and tried for conspiracy. The defense chief counsel, Charles Garry, was kept out of the courtroom, but his fighting spirit found its way in.
The people were disenchanted with the Democratic Party at their convention. They were not having a representative form of election of delegates. And the young people were dissatisfied. It's the young people that makes the lifeblood of any country go. The United States government, the country of democracy, was resorting to violence to stop it. They cracked heads, the police were cracked heads at Lincoln Park and Grants Park and wherever else the demonstrations were taking place. A conspiracy to silence people is a threat against freedom of expression. You silence the freedom of expression, you've got nothing but a police state on your hands.
It was a trial to try to put into jail 8 radicals from various different categories. A black radical like Bobby, a white radical like David Dellinger, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, Tom Hayden, and so on. And they were charged with a conspiracy to disrupt the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968.
And everybody in this room is part of the conspiracy. Part of the conspiracy.
Charlie was supposed to be chief counsel, but he had a gallbladder operation, and the judge would not adjourn the trial a couple of weeks so Charlie could represent Bobby Seale principally, but everybody as chief counsel.
Bobby Seale, as I understand it from the scuttlebutt, is to be kidnapped out of the prison here by the federal authorities and whisked away to Chicago, where he doesn't have a friend or a person to protect him.
I told my client, don't submit to anything in that courtroom because you're illegally there. You're not represented by anybody, and you yourself are not competent to defend yourself. You have competent lawyer.
The law is there. I have a right to legal counsel of choice. Subsequent Supreme Court rulings stated that I have a right to legal counsel of my choice, not the judge's choice.
I had told Bobby, you've made your point, now let's go along with the trial. But Charlie said, no, keep the protest up. And he was right, and I was wrong. Because what Bobby Seale did was to keep interrupting the judge all the time and saying, my lawyer isn't here, Charles R. Garry isn't here, I'm not represented, I want to represent myself then. And the judge would say, no, Mr. Kunstler represents you. And he kept saying, no, he's not my lawyer, Charles R. Garry is my lawyer, and I'm going to keep talking until you get me Charles or let me represent myself. And because of that, the judge went crazy. It was a Judge Julius Hoffman, went absolutely ape, and had him bound and gagged outside of the courtroom and brought in.
If he's using violence, there's only one way to meet violence. And that's either sit down or take counter action. And that's what I advised him to do. And I'd do it again. I'd do it again and again.
Judges Hoffman, you must be crazy, man. I mean, you must be out your mind. You're talking about killing me anyway. I'm supposed to be sitting down here and be timid. No, I'm not doing that. You're a racist, you're a fascist, and you're a pig. That's what you are. That blew that judge's mind. I have never, in all my years, this man been on the bench here, had a Negro defendant to refer to me as a racist, a fascist, and a pig, and to assail the pictures of our founding fathers, George Washington. I said, right, they own slaves, baby. Read history. They own slaves, and you acting in the same manner, I tell him.
When they bring Bobby in, held up in the air on a chair, his legs shackled to the chair, his arms shackled to the chair, and a tremendous gag in his mouth through which you could only hear muffled sounds. But because Charlie took the course he took, I think the whole trial was skewered. America saw a trial of a black man bound and gagged in the courtroom, and that was really the end of the trial. It went on until February. Bobby was removed permanently from it. But the United States had seen what could happen to a black man in a federal criminal trial. And the trial was never the same after that. And the eventual victory, I think, resulted from that.
Removed from the trial in Chicago, Bobby Seale still faced murder charges in New Haven, Connecticut. In May of '69, Seale had gone to Yale University to give a speech. Later the same day, a Panther from New York was tortured and killed in New Haven.
The victim was found with 2 bullet wounds in the head, and the body bore signs of mutilation, including ice pick wounds.
The police charged that Seale and the Panthers' New Haven chapter president Erica Huggins ordered the killing. By that time, police raids, shootouts, and FBI provocation had put the rest of the party leadership in prison. Garry knew that to win the case, he could not rely simply on the lack of evidence against his clients. He had to break the barrier of fear and prejudice surrounding the Black Panthers.
Charlie had a tremendously difficult job on his hands. The atmosphere in New Haven was so charged and so highly prejudiced against them. New Haven was like many other places. It was just a very, very hostile atmosphere. It was a small town. Notwithstanding Yale University being there, it was a very frigid atmosphere. The students were not going to be on the jury.
I had to offset, during the trial, the government's concept of the attitude of the Black Panther Party, that the Black Panther Party was a party of violence.
Because all the publicity that had come out made it very difficult to get an impartial jury. And they went through 4 months of jury selection.
4 solid months. I went through 1,550 prospective jurors before we got 12 persons to sit in judgment.
Power! Power! Power to the people! Power to the people!
There was some very funny things going on in the New Haven chapter of the Black Panther Party. You have to understand that in the 1960s, when the Panthers got a lot of publicity in Oakland as a result of the Newton trial, there were just people forming Black Panther Party chapters all over the country. So there were a lot of Black Panther Party chapters that were infiltrated. They were able to show during the trial that the torture and the murder was really carried out by one guy in the New Haven chapter who had, there were very strong indications could have been a police agent of some kind or other.
I remember there was a speech I made at Yale University that night that had been recorded on tape, and that Arnold Markle, the prosecution, had gotten a hold of this tape. And I guess they thought this tape was just going to be destructive to me.
In his speech, he talked about the history of why we're here. Why do we fight? What do we mean by fighting? We want a better America, not only for black people, for all Americans.
Well, I was able to tie that kind of speech in. And I guess Arnold Markle thought it was going to go against us, but Charles Garry used that speech. They tried to say by this, but the man's a stand-up comedian right in the middle of the speech. I actually had the jury cracking up when they were listening to this speech. This guy is wild, you know. So I'm just saying that he helped the jury see me beyond the surface, beyond the newspaper stereotyping, beyond the politicians who took to stereotyping.
People are drawn to him. I do remember in New Haven, you had all kinds of people, court employees, running up telling him which jurors to select because they kind of knew these people and they kind of whispered to him. And so he had basically the whole courtroom apparatus that you thought would tend to side with the prosecution was kind of siding with him.
If the judge gave him too hard a time, then the tactic would be one of making the judge part of the problem, part of the enemy, and appealing over the head of the judge to the jury. He would simply make the judge the enemy, let the jury know that the judge was the enemy, and that it was him standing with the people against the judges and the lawyers and the district attorney and everyone else.
He helped us and worked with us to make the community political atmosphere and protest interconnected with what that trial was about. I mean, 35,000 young white radicals came to New Haven on the New Haven Green. Yeah, and protested, free Bobby Seale, free Erica Huggins, right out in front of the courtroom, you know. to the extent that the state government had called out the National Guard and have them ready because they were projecting some so-called riot. No riots ever happened.
If we show them that they're going to have to turn New England into a police state to carry on that trial, that's what we showed them. So let's everybody chant now, free Bobby, free Erica, so loud they can hear us an hour and a half away. Free Bobby, free Erica, louder! Free Bobby, free Erica, free Bobby, free Erica, free Bobby, free Erica, free Bobby.
By the end of the case, the lead government witness, Charlie, had picked apart and really shown as someone who was liable to say anything, that they really raised considerable doubt in the jury's mind, and most people were convinced that the incident, as alleged, never happened. It was a tremendous success, getting basically the charges thrown out against Bobby and Erica, getting them acquitted in that long 6-month trial.
He was not only the attorney, but he was involved, you know, from levels of our protest movement, the effects that our protest efforts would have relative to the trial, to give the political voice or the political forum that we needed. I think that was part of the genius, you know, of Charles Garry.
Free Bobby Seale! Free Bobby Seale! Free Bobby Seale!
We've had 2 big moratoriums in the last 6 months. We had 1 million people out October 15th. We had 1 million people out November 15th. The war in Vietnam goes on. The war in Vietnam is now a war in Laos. It's a war in Cambodia. It's going on into Southeast Asia. There are 50,000 dead Americans. There are almost 1 million dead Vietnamese.
In the late 60s, Berkeley's anti-war movement was one of the strongest in the country. Among the many protest activities was an ambitious event called Stop the Draft Week, a series of demonstrations culminating in a blockade of the Army Induction Center in Oakland. It became the scene of violent confrontation between the police and the protesters.
Planning this demonstration clearly violated some laws. In this case, the law was there to protect the government that was waging this war. And if you really try to interfere with the war, you're going to break the law. That's just the way it was. I mean, you're breaking the law if you try to interfere with the war, really interfere with it.
Here is this government waging this illegal war, under international law and under United States law. And the turning point for us around Stop the Draft Week was that we said we will not accept those terms anymore. We will not accept their definitions of violence and nonviolence. We're going to make our own analysis and respond in the way that we think is appropriate.
At 6 a.m. when the buses come in bringing in inductees, it's dark, and there's no one on the streets. So you had this very eerie scene of thousands of people coming down to downtown Oakland, which is dark and empty except for demonstrators and police in riot gear. And it was a fairly hairy scene, and the people that attempted to sit in at first just got beaten up and clubbed and really badly, badly beaten by the Oakland police.
The indictments issued under California's general conspiracy statute accuses the boys of conspiring to perform 10 overt acts, including trespassing, blocking sidewalks, interfering with police officers, and creating a public nuisance. The fight goes on, but it's now in the courtroom. Pia Lindstrom reporting.
Well, I was at first in awe. I'd heard about Charles Garry. He had been in all the headlines, but I just knew him by reputation. I thought that I was going to have the opportunity to try a case with one of the masters, so it was exciting. It had to be exciting. There was no money in it.
I'll never forget Charlie's opening statement, because never in our wildest imaginations would we have expected that our political defense would be identified with the history of the oppression of the Armenian people. And he had everybody totally involved in this history. Charlie talked about how his family had come from Armenia to escape oppression, and they had come to America. And here he
here he was in America, and what he was seeing was the same kind of oppression, an attack on free speech, an attack on the freedom to dissent, an attack on the freedom to assemble.
What he made the trial about, I think, is two issues. One was, are you for the Vietnam War or against it? And the other one, are you for the Oakland police or are you for the demonstrators? Rather than, did they conspire to break these misdemeanors?
The government used the theory that if a person conspires to commit misdemeanors, they're guilty of a felony. Clarence Darrow gives the example of a young kid going by a candy store and seeing all this beautiful candy, and he starts dribbling, and he goes in there and steals one. It's only a misdemeanor, petty theft. But if 2 or 3 of them look there and start dribbling and go in and steal one apiece, that's a conspiracy, and it's a felony. You know, it's a lot of hokum.
Part of our defense was to demonstrate that the violence was not the result of any planning, but was rather the result of agents provocateurs who had stimulated people to acts of violence so that there could be a violent response by the police. Well, this was Charlie's theory, and I was very young. I frankly didn't know what an agent provocateur was. Much to my surprise, as we got into it, it turned out that there really were agents provocateurs, some of which we found that only, at least I found it only years later.
The whole violence argument I still don't understand. People still make it to this very day. They say, you know, the demonstrators were violent. You got this war going on, a war, that's like violence. And then if you don't sign up for the draft, somebody comes with a gun on their side, they take you and they put you in a jail behind bars, and if you don't go, they kick the shit out of you. I mean, how do we introduce violence into this situation, in this non-violent situation? The whole situation was violent.
The issue became whether you were going to wear helmets and carry shields.
It's very provocative to wear a helmet, because then a cop could hit you over the head.
And I think there had been a kind of conservative tendency to think you don't dare put out your politics real strongly or you'll alienate the jury. And I think Charlie had enough confidence in the people, ordinary people on the jury, to believe that, you know, you could make, you got them there, you could make your case about why you think the war is wrong, and you'll win their sympathy. You won't alienate them.
He was the one officer of the court who sort of was befuddled by the whole legal system and didn't understand the points of law and stuff like that. I mean, this was his presentation. But he was just like a common, ordinary person looking for justice. And in fact, Charlie understood the law real well.
When he was cross-examining the undercover agent, he's standing there looking away, and he turns to the guy and he says, "Have you ever heard the expression, think rat?" Right. Well, the expression was rat think, but you know, whether he really believes that that's the expression or not is irrelevant. The agent did not know how to respond, and as soon as Charlie said that, he turned, let's say the agent was here, he turned around to the audience and winked. So it was like he was in total control.
Who among you wish to return, for those of you that haven't gone, wish to go for the first time tomorrow morning to the Oakland Induction Center?
The prosecution wanted to just play a couple of speeches of ours from audio tapes from the rally before our first day. Charlie was the leader in insisting that they play the whole tape. And so what happened in like 8 hours, the jurors were educated into what a movement event was really about.
What you do is you bring the problems of the community into the courtroom. You don't separate it. You're not going to be able to say to the jury, "You're not to consider this war in Vietnam. Why are we here? You're not going to consider it." And we were able to show that these 7 young men had a duty to take every step they could to stop the war movement that was killing innocent people in Vietnam. That was our theory, that was our defense.
And now you have to remember his clients were all these radicals, these people that viewed themselves as revolutionaries and Marxists, Maoists, God knows, Trotskyists, everything. Charlie gives this part of the final argument where he starts talking about how what they did was patriotic, which may have been true, which I think is true, and how wonderful. And as he goes on and he's talking, Charlie's verbally wrapping himself in the American flag more and more. And he's talking about it, and his clients are just sinking lower and lower and lower into their chairs like, God, is this me? I don't want to be part of this. And it's almost like Charlie is getting up there and singing God Bless America. And at one point, he's down there on one knee in front of the jury reciting this Emerald Lazarus poem that's on the base of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, give me your poor, your huddled masses. And the jury was really affected by it. And his clients were mortified.
While I was reciting that, juror number 1, who I thought was very hostile to me all during the trial, she was reciting it with me. Every one of them, what I said about them was true. They were those kind of people. They wouldn't admit it, but what I said was very penetrating. They were crying. So was I.
And this judge especially has...
In May of 1970, Garry began a trial that most thought would turn out to be his first major defeat. 2 undercover policemen had stopped 7 Latino youths in San Francisco's Mission District, suspecting them of carrying stolen goods. There was a fight, and Officer Joe Brodnick was shot. All 7 youths were charged with murder. By the end of the 58-day trial, Garry had not only vindicated Los Siete, but had made the case a lesson in race relations, economic prejudice, and police misconduct.
I think in most of the cases we've had, there was an identity. I mean, Los Siete, in a way, you could ask the question, what was political about that? These were 7 Chicano youths who were charged with murdering a very popular San Francisco police officer. What's the politics of that?
I look upon every criminal case in some degree is a political case, because the person's background sometimes contributes to what happened. And to be poor and Mexican or Hispanic is a political entity. It's there. I didn't put it there. There were police officers who used to frame these guys. I put on this police officer's ex-wife to testify of the fact that he would carry heroin in his possession. And if the person that he was trying to arrest didn't cooperate, he framed him. We found this heroin in your pocket. And it just created these kind of situations. How do you expose this kind of misconduct? It's political. You have to show that they are a hated group.
On May 1st, you made the following statement.
He was conveying to the jury, and therefore to the public, the circumstances of the everyday life of a Chicano teenager. How it was part of their life to be harassed by police, to be confronted by police even though they perhaps hadn't done anything wrong, to be assaulted perhaps, and that to some extent they were victims. Only one person murdered or shot Officer Brodnick, but even if it were one of the Los Siete, was only one. And there's something, once again, this overreaching, as in the Oakland 7, the idea of trying to put 7 people away for life or in the gas chamber. You don't know who did it. There are these multiple options, and it's sure unfair to convict somebody if you don't know who did it, even though the guilty person might have to go free. That's just not fair. That's not America.
But it was Charlie who always led off the defense assault, and it was like he was like a There's like about 3 or 4 blocking backs, just sweeping out everything. And then the witness was kind of left there naked and undefended, and the other lawyers just kind of picked apart at all the contradictions Charlie had exposed. And the judge was completely overmatched.
I was cross-examining one of the star witnesses, and I said, "You're lying, aren't you? You don't know how to tell the truth, do you?" And District Attorney Tom Norman says, "Objection. What are you objecting about? Irrelevant." And R.J. Engel, representing one of the other defendants, "The truth is irrelevant?"
And the case all turned on the evidence of the cop who survived, Paul McGauran. McGauran had been taking Valiums to keep him calm on the witness stand because he had a nasty temper. I think one of the alternative newspapers labeled him Prince Valium. And so Charlie would open almost every session saying, "Well, Mr. Witness, have you taken Valium just now?" "No." "Yes, sir." He'd say, "Now, is it your testimony that you never used foul language?" And McGauran said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You mean you never used foul or obscene language?" "That's right." He said, "And you never used words that would be called curse words?" "No, never, sir." He said, "And you never used words that would be offensive to a large number of people?" "That's right, sir." And Charlie, at that time, had his back to McGauran, and he just turns around and he puts his face about 2 inches from McGauran, and he says, "Well, what about asshole?" And the whole jury breaks up, the whole courtroom falls out, and Charlie walks away with this smirk on his face, and McGauran is huddling around. He said,
The point is that it provided an opportunity for Charles to raise all kinds of issues about racism in the Chicano community. And the Chicano community rallied to the defense of these kids. And you see, that's what Charlie liked to accomplish.
I'm interested in the issues in the trial that the lawyers are trying to bring out, the issues such as self-defense and racism, and the fact that these police officers can go around carrying guns in the ghetto areas of the city and ripping off our brothers in the ghettos.
November 12th, 1970. The verdict. Gary Lescalet. Not guilty. Mario Martinez.
The verdict came in shortly after 4 o'clock on 14 of the 18 charges. The jury acquitted all Latin youths on charges of murder and attempted murder. Friends of the defendants, overjoyed by the decision, rushed from the courtroom. Defense attorney Charles Garry commented on the verdict.
Yes, we feel very happy, of course, that the jury was able to come in on this lying police officer. But we're not very happy about the case. We're not very happy that the defendants received a fair trial. The jury had the conscience of the community. But if it wasn't for that jury, if it was left for that court and the judge and the prosecution and the police department, they would have rotted in hell or ended up in the gas chambers. When we have to have clients who are obviously innocent, who have to spend 17 and a half months in prison because the system says that's the way you have to do, and be degraded right up to the minute when a verdict comes in. They have to be degraded even when the jury comes in and says you're not guilty. The judge still says you've got to go back in the holding cell and treat them like a bunch of caged animals. When we have that kind of a system, then the law, I say, is irrelevant to the people who are involved in this. I feel very strongly about this, and I'm saying this, that the law today is completely irrelevant to the needs of at least 60 million Americans.
I'm a firm believer. There's no such thing as justice in the courtroom. The courtrooms are not equipped for justice. They were never intended to be for justice. Because if there was such a thing as justice in the courtrooms, there would be no poverty. There'd be no hunger, because then the courts would be able to equate justice and see that everybody got their fair share of everything. But that's not the way the rules are fixed.
He viewed the courtroom as a reflection of a racist society. And I think Charles did as much as anybody in history, in legal history, to change that orientation.
Where you have a political client, one who really reeks with politics, it's important that you furnish a vehicle for that person to get those politics across to the jury, to the press, to the judge, to everybody. Charlie understands that well.
You have to believe in people to be the kind of lawyer that Charlie is and to win the way he wins. And that's because if you believe in people, you believe in their ability to understand things, and you believe in your ability as a lawyer to talk to them. And that's really his magic.
We started out as comrades in the revolutionary movement, and we developed to be great friends. He always empathized with his clients to the point where he would be on trial himself. And that takes a lot out of a person, maybe sometimes even more than it takes out of the client.
All I can teach my fellow practitioners is to have the juries understand your client. The law can be made very humane. The law can be made very understanding. Juries are people, your peer group or people in your community. They will understand if you teach them. We're not going to lead the revolution. It's not our job. Our job is to give legal first aid so people who want to make change can make the change. I'm an activist lawyer, Charles Garry, meaning I represent the activists. I'm not the guy that's out there in the front line, and I don't intend to be. At the age of 80, I'd be a hindrance out there in the front line.